Imagine this. You're just a teenager living in a world where every day feels like a battle, and yet in the face of violence, fear, and oppression, you choose to speak out. You choose to speak for something so simple, yet so powerful: education. What would make you risk your life for the right to learn? I am Malala Yousafzai, and at 11 years old, I made a choice that changed my life forever. I chose to speak up, not for myself, but for girls like me, who were denied the right to go to school, to learn, to have a future. In a place where silence seemed like the only safe option, where fear ruled every corner of our lives, I spoke. And that voice, even in the face of grave danger, gave hope to millions of girls and boys around the world. But speaking up when it is dangerous, when the very act of using your voice can cost you your life, is not something most people ever have to consider. Today, I want to share my journey, the dangers I faced, and the power of speaking out when everything around you says stay silent. My story began in Pakistan, in the beautiful, peaceful Swat Valley. It was a place I loved, a place where I could hear the sound of birds and feel the breeze on my face as I walked to school. But in 2007, everything changed. The Taliban entered our valley, and suddenly life as I knew it was over. They brought with them fear and oppression. They told us what we could wear, how we should act, and most importantly, they told us that girls like me could not go to school. Their interpretation of Islam was one that sought to erase the idea of education for girls and women, a threat to their power, they believed. For many, this would have been a time to stay silent, to hide and to comply. After all, the Taliban wasn't just a political group. They were a military force, and they wielded their power with fear. But I couldn't. From a young age, my father taught me the value of education. He believed in me and my potential, and I knew that if I stayed quiet, I was not only giving up on my future, but I was also giving up on the future of every girl who had a dream of going to school. So I started to speak, and not just in the privacy of my home. I took a risk that, to many, seemed foolish. In 2009, I started writing a blog for the BBC Urdu, sharing the struggles I faced under the Taliban's rule. I wrote about how girls like me were banned from going to school, about the fear we lived with every day. My blog was written under a pseudonym, and I never expected anyone to find out who I was. I just wanted to share our reality, to let the world know what was happening. But when the Taliban found out, they didn't just want to silence me, they wanted to punish me. They didn't want to hear my voice, and they wanted to send a message to anyone else who might dare to speak up. They started making threats against me and my family. I knew I was being watched. I knew my life was in danger. But in that moment, I made a choice. I would continue to speak. I would continue to demand the right to education, not just for me, but for every girl in Swat, in Pakistan, and around the world. And then came October 9, 2012. I was riding the bus home from school that day when a man boarded, asked for me by name, and shot me in the head. The bullet that struck me was meant to silence me. It was meant to stop me from speaking. But it didn't. The attack was horrifying, and it left me with physical scars that will never disappear. But what it didn't take away from me was my voice. The bullet was intended to destroy my spirit, to crush my will to fight for what I knew was right, but it only made me stronger. After the shooting, I was flown to Birmingham, England, where I spent weeks in the hospital recovering. I still remember the moment I woke up and realized I was alive. It was surreal, but it was also a moment of clarity. I had been given a second chance. And I promised myself that I would never stop speaking. The attack was meant to stop me, but instead, it gave me a platform, a global audience to continue the fight. In the months that followed, I became a symbol of resistance, of hope, of the power of one voice. People from around the world supported me, and with their support, I knew that I was not alone. And I realized something profound. When one person speaks up, it doesn't just change that one person's life, it can change the world. But speaking out, especially when it's dangerous, isn't just about getting attention or fighting for personal recognition. It's about fighting for others. I didn't speak out for myself alone. I spoke for the millions of girls who would never have a chance to sit in a classroom, for the boys and girls whose voices would be silenced by fear and oppression. I spoke for the future of education in my country and for every child who deserves the right to learn. But let's pause here for a moment. Why do so many people remain silent when they know something is wrong? Why do we hold back our voices, even when the injustice around us is undeniable? The answer for most is fear. Fear of what might happen if we speak out. Fear of the consequences, of losing our jobs, our families, our safety. And sometimes that fear is justified. When you live in a world where speaking out can cost you your life, it becomes incredibly hard to find the courage to say what needs to be said. Yet, I've come to realize that the fear of silence is often greater than the fear of speaking up. What is the point of staying silent if it means allowing injustice to continue? The fear of remaining silent is the fear of allowing others to suffer in our place. In the years following the attack, I spoke to leaders from around the world about the importance of girls' education. I spoke at the United Nations, urging every country to pledge to ensure education for all children, and I was not alone in this fight. There are so many others who have stood up against the injustices in their communities, against oppression, against inequality, and against corruption. They too know the cost of speaking out, but they understand that silence will never bring change. There is a phrase I've come to live by: one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world, and it starts with speaking up. But here's the hard truth. Most people are scared to speak up, not just because of the threats, but because of the unknown. What happens when you raise your voice? What if no one listens? What if your voice doesn't make a difference? What if the people you're trying to help don't understand what you're doing? The challenge is that speaking up requires courage, and courage is something that doesn't always come easily, especially when you know that the consequences could be severe. But even knowing that, I have to ask, what is the cost of silence? What happens when we allow injustice to continue because we are too afraid to speak? The reality is that silence never leads to change. It only allows the darkness to grow unchecked. The world needs more people who are willing to step forward, even when the stakes are high. When we speak up, we start a ripple that spreads out into the world, inspiring others to do the same. When I stood before the United Nations, I wasn't just representing myself. I was representing every girl who had been silenced, every child whose voice had been ignored, every person who had ever faced oppression. In that moment, I realized the power of my words, but the impact of speaking up goes far beyond one moment or one speech. It's about the countless lives that are affected by our willingness to stand up for what's right. It's about a person who hears your voice and decides to speak out too. It's about a child who, because of your bravery, believes they can dream of a better future. Speaking up doesn't mean we have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers or the solutions. We just need to have the courage to take that first step, to say, this is wrong, and I will not be silent. The moment I realized the true power of speaking out came during a speech I gave at the United Nations. As I stood there, I wasn't just speaking for me. I wasn't just speaking for girls in Pakistan. I was speaking for the entire world. And in that moment, I saw something incredible. My voice was no longer just my own. It had become the voice of millions. I realized then that speaking out doesn't just change the person who speaks. It has the power to transform entire societies. It starts a chain reaction. The world listens. People hear you. And together we can change everything. Speaking up when it's dangerous isn't easy. It's not something anyone should ever have to do. But the truth is, sometimes silence is the greatest threat of all. When we speak out for what's right, for justice, for education, for equality, we are doing more than just using our voices. We are creating the change we wish to see in the world. And remember, it all starts with one voice, one person, one decision to speak up, no matter the cost. If you believe in the power of speaking up for what's right, make sure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message.